Goedenavond allemaal. Welkom bij weer een nieuwe aflevering van Gente Mágica. En tijdens dit interview ga ik in gesprek met mensen die een passie hebben voor Latijns-Amerika, net zoals ik dat heb. En die een bijzonder verhaal te vertellen hebben. En vandaag heb ik Dolores Gangotena de Diez. Zij zit in Ecuador en daar gaan we het vandaag uitgebreid mee hebben over Galapagos, een van de mooiste natuurgebieden in de wereld. Dolores, welcome. Thank you for being here. What makes Galapagos unique?
Thank you, Johan. Good evening to everyone who's listening to the program. Actually, everything that Galapagos offers is absolutely unique. The scenery of the Galapagos, anybody who has been in the islands will be able to tell you that it's sort of a magical environment. It makes you feel like you are back in time. I do remember once a guest of ours who just told me, I just felt like in the time where dinosaurs were populating the earth. So that is what is so magical, the uniqueness of the species, the underwater life, the land life, and especially, the tameness of the wildlife. So in short, Johan, everything that Galapagos offers to a guest, to a tourist, is absolutely unique.
Yeah, that's I completely agree with that. Just for the people to know, it's Galapagos archipel is in Ecuador. It's about 1,000 kilometers away from the main. And it's because the uniqueness of the situation with all the animals. It's that it's a volcanic group of islands that has never been stuck to the mainland, and you have like two currents coming to Galapagos, which brings in food. Am I correct like that?
Absolutely. Actually, that is what makes Galapagos so unique, because the Humboldt Current brings in the cold waters of Antarctica, bringing in a lot of plankton, which makes it such a fantastic place during the months from July until November for the big pelagics to arrive by the hundreds to the Galapagos. You're talking about whale sharks and hundreds of hammerheads that arrive to the islands at that time of the year. But also El Niño current it brings warmer waters, bringing in a bit of tropical fish. So that is what makes Galapagos so absolutely unique. So unique it is that there are only two other places in the world where you can find penguins around the equatorial line. And that's, that's in Africa, in Cape Town, and also in the Galapagos. So it's such a special place where you will be able to find in a tropical paradise a penguin, which is a Galapagos penguin, which is unique to the islands.
Great. And yeah, it's not you made your business out of your passion for Galapagos. I remember it's like you told me that 69 was the first time you visited Galapagos. How was it when you were there for the first time?
Actually, that's the experience, Johan, that changed my life. I was, by then I was only 17. And, the passion came through a class that we had with a biology teacher who actually started to tell us about the Galapagos and the theory of Charles Darwin. And at that time, Galapagos was very little known in Ecuador, and also not very well known around the world. So we had to go on a Navy ship that used to take dry goods to the few people living in the islands at that time. In 1969, in the Galapagos, there were about 4,000 people divided between the 3 towns. So it was actually a very small population, and you had to go navigating from Guayaquil to the islands. The navigation took 2.5 days. And believe me, it was difficult to be able to get. First, keep in mind you're living in a Latin American country. The parents of each one of us were extremely strict in our education, and trying to get the permission to go for 15 days to the Galapagos on a Navy boat. Thank goodness that the biology teacher, she said, I'll go with you girls. And that's how it all happened. That's why we were able to get the permission to go to the islands. So we went with her. It was 5 of us, and it was the trip of our lives. Believe me, one of the magical moments of my life was when on the first island that we arrived to, which was San Cristobal, they put the dinghy down, one of those very uncomfortable wooden dinghies, and a sea lion literally jumped inside the dinghy. And, we were terrified. And the sailor just said, don't worry. The wildlife is just so tame. They will not do anything to you. And that was my first encounter with that fabulous wildlife. And the photograph that you're showing there, it's me feeding the iguanas, because there was no tourism at the time. So the sailors would give us oranges, and we would feed the iguanas with oranges. So you can imagine that we probably did a lot of bad to those iguanas, because instead of waiting underneath a cactus tree for a fruit to fall off, they were having this juicy orange that we gave them. But it was just the most incredible experience, that a person who enjoys and loves nature could have. That's what really made it, Johan. That's what put Galapagos into my heart and my mind until now.
And at that time, Dolores, was it already a protected area, or how do you see it? What was the main purpose of income of the people who live there?
Absolutely. Actually, the few people living in the Galapagos, Johan, they live through fishing. For example, this cargo boat that we went on used to take to the islands dry goods for the people living in Galapagos, but they return with fish, dry fish, because they had no. It was not a boat that had any sort of ice making possibilities. So the people in the islands would dry the fish, and that boat with us on board took back the fish back to the mainland. And mainly they lived off what the islands gave them. By the time that I went, the Widmers, if you've heard the history of the Galapagos, the first Germans that arrived to the islands, the Widmers had already planted some oranges in Floriana Island. So you could actually get some local fruit, which were oranges, a little bit of guayaba, which they call it guava, they call it in English. Those were the plants that they brought from the continent, planted them in the islands, and they had some fresh fruit for them, to eat. A little bit of blackberries also, which now the guava and the blackberries are ones, are the two most difficult plagues to get rid of. It's amazing, the national park, how much they have to fight against those two plants, because they're taking over the endemic plants of the Galapagos. But let's face it, at that time for the settlers, it was a blessing. They had some fruit to eat, guayabas and oranges. So that's what they lived on, amazing. And from the products that was brought in from the continent, like rice and potatoes, things that did not spoil quickly, because that I remember going on that boat, they didn't have any sort of cold storage. It was just cargo, plain cargo. So the only thing that they could take was like carrots, that sort of vegetable that would not spoil in about the 4 days that it took, all in all, to disembark those vegetables in the islands.
And like you were there on a Navy boat. Was there any kind of tourism besides you going on the Navy boat, or was it? How was that?
Not, not at all, Johan. Actually, Metropolitan Touring was on the verge of starting their operation by then. The Galapagos was already a national park. There were about 10 scientists living in Santa Cruz Island in Puerto Ayora, who were actually employed by the Charles Darwin Station. And that is, that's all of the science present at the time in the islands. Concerning tourism, there was nothing. Actually, on the boat that we were on, the boat stopped on all of the inhabited islands, which was San Cristobal. We stayed for about 3 days in Puerto Vaquerizo Moreno, and the tourism that we did it on our own. And we probably destroyed part of the nature of the Galapagos. There were no trails. As I mentioned before, we used to feed the wildlife, something that it's totally forbidden right now. But then, the wildlife was so tame, and we were for them, a curiosity. They were not accustomed to humans as they are now, so they approached us. I remember they want us, literally wanting to come on top of us, from our legs, which you felt a little bit afraid. The sea lions getting so close to you. If you sat down on the beach, the sea lions the little ones will just come and jump on your lap. I mean, it was, oh no, the birds will just go on your shoulders. It was, believe me, it was the experience of a lifetime. That is something that I missed. Now that the wildlife is a bit more accustomed and less curious of us humans, they don't approach you they don't go away, but they do not approach you any longer as they used to do at the time. It was actually beautiful, Johan. What an experience.
And then you had this beautiful experience, it changed your life, like you said. Then at a certain point, you decided to start your own tourism business over there in Galapagos. I think it was 86. How did that go?
Actually, I married my husband in 1977. And by then, I had already been in the islands 3 times, going on similar boats to the one I went on my first time. But then by 1982, somebody who had actually some relations with Galapagos, and it was actually Margaret Widmer, the German lady who lived there. Amazing how Galapagos was so much linked to my family since I went there. My father used to have a radio, which was the only way of communicating with the islands. And because he had this radio, he became a good friend to Rolf Widmer, the son of Margaret Widmer. And whenever they needed something urgently, I would remember my father, calling the authorities or calling the Navy, saying, listen, in Galapagos, they are in need of these medicines and that sort of thing. So through that radio, is that, we really got to know a little bit more about the Galapagos. So by 1982, through Margaret Widmer, she told us that there was this turn of the century sailboat that we could actually rent out for ourselves if we wanted to go to the Galapagos. And with Eduardo, I told Eduardo, you have to go, you have to see this magical place. And that's how we ended up going on this boat that used to take 8 passengers, extremely uncomfortable boat. It had 1 bathroom for the 8 passengers. Shower was with salt water, ocean water. You just had to pump and water will come out of a hose. it didn't matter. It was the experience of a lifetime also, even better than the ones I had experienced before on the larger boats with lots of people. This one, was absolutely fantastic. And that's at that time, it's when Eduardo, who has a more business mind than mine, he said, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to offer to guests this experience on small boats, but boats with, with more, with a safety, with safety devices, and also with more comfort. And that is how all it started. It took us 4 years to find out, how to get the permits. It took us 4 years to be able to get a credit, which we ended up getting it from a French bank. At that time, Johan, how difficult it was to work with Ecuadorian banks. We actually did a business model for the company, and none of the Ecuadorian banks believed in it. And believe it or not, my husband was one day sitting at the dentist, and he had a gentleman on his side. He was French. And they were talking, and he said, well, what is it that you do? And Eduardo told him, well, at this moment, we actually are, we represent the Land Rover brand here in Ecuador. And but in the future, my dream and my wife's dream is to get involved with the Galapagos, but we're finding it so difficult to get credits from Ecuadorian banks. And he said, I might be able to help you, because I have a good friend from a French bank who might be interested in what you're saying. And amazingly enough, Johan, that's how Eduardo gets in contact with this man from the European bank, and we get a French credit with, and the only thing that we had to do is buy a French boat. And that's how we ended up buying our first boat from the Guy Coage factory, which is in Arcachon, France, and with a French credit. And when we brought in that boat, it was extremely successful. It had the comfort, it had the safety devices, and especially it had the knowledge that we wanted to give our guests when they went to the Galapagos. And that's how we all started. Our second boat, it was the Mistral. By the Van der Hoven, it was actually a Dutch boat. We got amazing that it was the European banks who believed in us and not Ecuadorian banks. The Mistral, which was the Dutch boat, was actually, we got it through a Dutch credit. So it was, that was the beginning of Quasar. Yeah. How amazing.
It's amazing to hear how this all started, and just from nothing, because now you know that there are so many boats and possibilities to visit Galapagos. You saw it growing, of course, from this early beginning to what it is right now. I would like to go back later on about how you saw it evolving. But what made you chose to do it with small boats? But what was the unique selling point of Quasar Expeditions? What did you do different than others in terms of tourism in Galapagos?
Probably, Johan, the fact that we were always present, the fact that we constantly went on board, the crew members actually saw us as part of the operation, which is so difficult. I see it, with the bigger operations and with so many operations going, having a business in the Galapagos nowadays. You have to keep the relationship with your crew. You have to keep your eye. I mean, what is it that you want to offer your guests? And our dream was to offer the best of the Galapagos to our guests. That is why at the beginning of our operation, the 1 week itinerary that we offered was so incredibly complete. I mean, that changed, and you know it, about 7 years ago, when the national park, because of the growth of the number of boats in the islands, decided that the boats could only visit the highlights of the Galapagos only once every 15 days. That's when we had to come up with 2 8-day itineraries to be able to show the best of the Galapagos in each one. At the time, you know, our 1 week itinerary was an absolute, you know, the best of the knowledge of the islands. You would get it through that itinerary. And right now, both itineraries that we offer the activities, the details that we wanted to put into the experience of our guests. What I experienced on that very first time that I visited the islands, that's what I want our guests to experience, Johan. I think that's probably part of why we have been successful in our operation, because we just want to pass along what I experienced and what Eduardo experienced to our guests.
Yeah, that's what we get back, of course, also from our clients, is that the expertise and the enthusiasm of your guides. You have been evolving the business and has been growing, but also the tourism itself in Galapagos has been growing a lot. Just to give an idea, you told me that when you were there for the first time, there were probably like 4,000 visitors. With what amount of visitors are we talking now?
Johan, no, at the time that I visited first, there were 4,000 people living in the Galapagos. Actually, visitors, no more than about 100 a year. You know, it was just a few scientists and nothing. So nowadays, it's you're talking about almost 250,000 visitors per year. That's the last number that the National Park shared with us for 2019. So you're talking about an exponential growth, to my liking, too fast. I mean, the National Park has not been able to grasp the control that they need with all of the, you know, because right now in the Galapagos, you're not only talking about the navigational tourism, which is the one we do, which is on board boats, but you have also seen a growth of land-based infrastructure that has grown without any sort of control. What has happened in the islands is that the national park has not been able to prevent the growth of homes into hotels. Because if you have a home in the Galapagos, and this is what has been happening in the past years, you just build 3 extra rooms, and afterwards you rent them out as a hotel. So those are the numbers that permit that that big growth in the hostelry side of the Galapagos that has really no control of. Authorities are not really very sure how many rooms are available for tourism. The hotels are very well taken care of. They know, they have their permits and everything. But the individual and private homes that have been turned into hotels is what actually has made the national park lose control over the number of people visiting the islands. Because of this exponential growth, the national park saw the need to open up several other ways for people to live and to make some money out of tourism. So they came up with new operational permits like sport fishing, which I'm sorry to say, to me, there is nothing more awkward and ridiculous to be done in the Galapagos than sport fishing. There are so many other places in continental Ecuador or in the world where sport fishing can take place, not in the islands. I mean, the Galapagos are just such so opposed to something like that. And then you're talking about the port-to-port operations, which is a small little boats that pick you up in one of the inhabited ports, and then they take you towards the other inhabited port. But the big problem with that is that control happens so seldom that I have seen those boats stopping by in Santa Fe, for example, one of the islands on the way towards Puerto Ayora, and I have seen people getting down and visiting that island without a naturalist guide or without the permit to do that sort of visit. So those are the things that I would hope at this moment the Galapagos National Park can actually start correcting, now that that most of the people who were living in the Galapagos have had to return to the continent, because right now there is zero tourism in the island. So if there is a way in which the COVID-19 could be positive, is in this one. The authorities have a possibility of correcting what has been going wrong in the islands.
Yes, because for us human beings, it's like a really bad time with the COVID situation. But I guess for the wildlife in Galapagos, it's a complete bless. What do you think that that authorities or like tourism is going to learn from this situation? How do you see that?
Actually, Johan, what I have seen in the past couple of months, it's because when the islands were closed, most of the people who had been living in the Galapagos without being from the Galapagos returned to the continent, because most of the small restaurants, lots of small businesses that were happening in the Galapagos, they had to return because there was nothing they could do in the islands. So if something there is to be learned, it's that, in the Galapagos, the businesses should be linked to the number of tourists that could be allowed to enter the Galapagos every year. And I truly think, having talked to authorities of the Charles Darwin Foundation, to World Wildlife Fund, 250,000 for the Galapagos, it's a limit, Johan. And the way it was happening, that was going to exceed anytime soon, because it was happening. People were seeing that in the Galapagos, if you put a restaurant, it filled out. If you put a boutique, it will, you will sell your things. So things were growing exponentially without any sort of controls. So if at all possible, if authorities could actually limit it to those 250,000 visitors per year, hopefully the number of people living in the Galapagos will be those that can give some services to those 250,000, and that will avoid many of the people getting into illegal fishing, which is, to me, one of the worst problems that the Galapagos face, or even worse, drug trafficking. I'm sorry to be so blunt with this information, but believe me, it's a reality in the islands. It's, the Colombian and the big drug cartels use the Galapagos as a place to stop, with the very fast boats that stop over in the islands, fill out with fuel, and then continue to Central America. That is something that has been, a lot of controls have been put into that by our military, and hopefully they will be successful. But nowadays that they have the possibility of really controlling and patrolling while this COVID situation happens, I wish that will stop. So those will be the benefits of COVID-19 towards the Galapagos. I really hope that those two things really stop, because the Galapagos could perfectly be self-sustainable concerning energy, concerning food, concerning water, if only there will be a limitation of people living in the islands.
I completely agree with it, and it's good that you mention these kind of things, because it's important to know, and that not only to talk about all the beautiful things, but also that the hazards that Galapagos is facing. We're both working in tourism for such a long time. What do you think that we as a tourism industry could contribute to preserve Galapagos in the best possible way?
I would say, Johan, not only us as being part of the tourism industry, Sapapana and Quasar, but also everybody who's interested in traveling to the Galapagos should actually go there with the interest of seeing the Galapagos more than interested in the boat experience. And mind you, we have boats and we put a lot of effort into the boat experience, but the interest of the visitor should be in seeing the islands, in enjoying that magical wildlife, in enjoying the underwater life, and avoiding those excesses that sometimes we humans enjoy when we visit Paris or we visit Berlin or we visit Amsterdam, and that is why I am, I'm so opposed to having, in the Galapagos, on the main towns, discotheques. Right now it was amazing how in the past couple of years, every time I went to the Galapagos, I saw more discotheques in Puerto Ayora, for example. I understand that young people have they need to have some fun every now and then. Okay, but 2 or 3. But right now there were so many of them. So if there is something we should learn out of that is, you're not going to the Galapagos for that. You're going to the Galapagos to enjoy the wildlife, and that is something. If we get the sort of guest who goes with that vision, the Galapagos will remain pristine. And I hope also that for the younger generations, and because it's mainly, the younger people who go to the Galapagos and they want to have the parties here and there. And I understand that, we were all that way at that age, but the Galapagos should not be for that.
I agree with that. And there was a discussion I had later, like a few days ago in the office. That's something, if we talk about like the situation right now with COVID, I think we have been disabusing as human beings or planet, and it has been for a while the fact that everyone had to be able to go to every certain place. For example, if like our parents said, for example, if they were going to, like, let's say Spain, it was a big trip. Right now, if people are like 17, 18 years old, they say I go for a weekend. I go to Barcelona, and these kind of things. I think, it's my personal opinion, it's not possible. We have to, if you like book a ticket for like $250 just to Puerto Ayora to have a party over there, that's a wrong way to go over there. And these kind of things have to change, and hopefully this situation that we are having, hopefully is going to benefit in making these kind of things better. How do you think about that?
Totally agree, Johan. Totally agree. Actually, you cannot imagine how much I have been trying to not promote the Galapagos as a convention center. Believe it or not, even the government on occasion hold these big meetings in Puerto Ayora. You're talking about 200 people all of a sudden getting there to attend a convention for the Thursday and a Friday, and they start up to Sunday. The Galapagos is not ready for that. I mean, keeping in mind that all of the resources at this moment are not really make Galapagos not sustainable. Not yet the Galapagos had water making facilities. So most of the water, especially in the inhabited places in Puerto Ayora, it comes from the highlands. And, the water in Puerto Ayora, it's not the very best available. In San Cristobal, they do have a little bit better water. It comes also from El Junco, which is a small lagoon that they have on the highlands of Puerto Vaquerizo. But the water is limited in the islands. All of the energy Right now, there is eolic energy in Puerto Ayora. They have these, these air. How do you call these? You have them in
windmills, like
the windmills.
yeah.
Exactly, they do have the windmills in Baltra, and they're providing about 25% of the energy for Puerto Ayora, but 75% is still produced by diesel, by generators run by diesel. So it's not at all self-sustainable. So if at all possible, if these, when these big groups that impact so much, those resources should not really be allowed, to get to the islands. This sort of tourism allowed to the Galapagos should be for those who really want to see the nature, who are not going there for a party. And I totally agree with you in that respect, Johan.
Like if you look at your own company, you have two boats. You have the MS Grace, which was the former honeymoon ship of Prince Rainier and Princess Gracia of Monaco, and then you have the Evolution. How do you, as a company, what do you do to preserve nature and to work, as ecological as possible?
Actually, Johan, concerning the boats, we try, if at all possible, even though not 100%, and I have to admit it, because up to the latest equipment for ecological equipment is extremely expensive. But mind you, we have been able to, up to now, to have about 80% of the equipment that we have on board the boats that actually help in one or another way the ecology of the Galapagos. For example, we have water treatment plants. So all of the waters that we discharge from the boat are already treated, and they face no risk whatsoever to the ocean. We have generators that consume 1/3 of the oil that the former generators, they were state-of-the-art generators, so that they only use 1/3 of the oil that the former generators used to consume. Our engines are also low fuel consuming engines. And we, as every other boat in the Galapagos, who actually follows the law, we actually take very good care of how we discharge the garbage when we enter Puerto Ayora. We need to divide the garbage, and by the time we enter Puerto Ayora, somebody from the national park gets on board the boat, and we actually hand over the garbage that is divided between tins or glass. So in that way, and especially by having our naturalists train the crew members on the reasons why we should not pollute, throw, or do anything that will damage the environment. When you work with the people who is on board, that's the best prevention to avoid damaging the islands, Johan. When people are aware that what they're doing might damage the environment, they actually keep themselves from doing it. Yeah. And especially, we work with them, even psychologically, and tell them, what we're selling here is the Galapagos. And I normally joke with them and I say, you might be very good looking, you're lovely, but believe me, our guests are not coming here to look at you. They're coming here to look at the wildlife. They laugh with me when I tell them so, but it's a way, it's tell them, listen, it's lovely and it's fantastic that you offer the best that you can out of your job, and they do it with a passion, really. So we get fabulous comments, from our guests for the work that our crew does. But at the same time, they're very aware that what they do is to preserve what we're selling. And that, I think, is part of the, if all operations could do the same, that's the best way to preserve. People should be aware that everything that they do has an impact on the nature that is surrounding them.
Yeah, it's about creating ambassadors for Galapagos. What do you think? Like, if you start at a young age to become an ambassador, like family with kids, would that be something to do, or do you what kind of age would it be interesting to take kids over there?
Actually, Johan, some of the very best results that we've had have been through families who have been with us. The young kids, I mean, normally when we have families on board, one of the naturalists, it's children friendly that we call it. I mean, they're very good with children. They do special activities with the children. And, while the adults are having dinner, we have normally fed the children prior their parents at dinner time. Breakfast and lunch, they have it with the parents, but at dinner, we offer them an earlier dinner. And the guide, who is actually children friendly, works with the kids so that they learn and they see what the problems the Galapagos face. And so that is why my recommendation is that children 8 years and older should actually visit the Galapagos. The experience will remain with them forever. And I don't know if in Europe you can do something like that, but before the COVID, we used to have, we were having children on board at any time during the year, really. Something that we like to do, though, it's if a child wants to book on a departure, that there are only adults, and let's say Zapapana has a couple of your passengers want to go on board, we will first ask you, Johan, if they do not mind having children on board, because we do have a special family departures who go with children. So if your passengers say, no, we don't mind, we will book those children on board. And believe me, no matter if they go with adults or they go on family departures, it's an incredible experience for children. They will become nature, concerned with nature until they get old. I mean, it's fabulous. It's a fabulous experience for children.
Okay, nice to know. Dolores, now we almost been talking for 45 minutes. So we have some audience listening. So maybe there are some questions. I will continue for a moment in Dutch. Voor iedereen die nu zit te luisteren en die vragen heeft, aan de rechterkant kun je zeg maar via de chat vragen stellen. Mocht je dingetjes willen vragen aan mij of aan Dolores, stuur ze in, dan nemen ze meteen mee in het verhaal. Dolores, if you could wish for something for Galapagos, what would be your biggest wish?
I would say my biggest wish will be that everyone who is now living in the Galapagos and those who will visit in the Galapagos in the future realize what a very special paradise it is, and that we would all be very concerned about the future of the wildlife. I mean, the wildlife of the Galapagos has no other protectors than ourselves. I mean, we humans. So everybody who visits and lives in the Galapagos should be aware of what the value of what we have right there in that paradise.
Now that's I think that's something great to conclude this conversation. A very nice conversation. Oh, I see one question coming in. It's a compliment for you, Dolores, that you're talking with so much passion about Galapagos. Maybe one question about that. When I saw you, we have already put it on our website as well. There's like a short movie that's on your website, made by one of your sons. You went with your boys. You have 3 boys sons grown up right now already. But you went with them to Galapagos when they were little, and you did the trip again a few years ago. Could you tell me how your experience was when you did it the first time, and how it was to go back with them after such a long period?
Yeah, actually, when I went there for the first time with the boys, what was amazing, Johan, was that we had no restrictions whatsoever. There was such a few other tourists that, whenever we just landed on a visitor site, there was no one. So you could actually do almost anything. And I did send you, when you said what was an extremely, memorable experience, I would say snorkeling at Las Marielas, which is in the western side of Isabela, with the 3 little boys. I mean, we were just snorkeling with probably 60 penguins and flightless cormorants going all over the place. Oh my God, that really, we came out, and believe it or not, that was the beginning of the kayaking in the Galapagos, because my oldest son, at that time, he was 9 years old. He just said, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a kayak and just paddle around, and click. That was, how we started, and we brought into the Galapagos some kayaks. So that was my first experience. And then when we, went back to the Galapagos several other times, but the last time that we went was when the company turned 30 years in the business. And the beauty of being with them, the beauty of seeing, Johan, that we had instilled in our sons the love for nature that they now have. The 3 of them are involved in Quasar. The 3 of them are constantly looking at the ways to preserve the Galapagos. And that is, that has been for me, the pleasure of my life and the love of my life. The Galapagos is now instilled in my boys. So it has been a fabulous voyage, truly.
So as it changed your life in the beginning, that you came to Galapagos, in that way it also changed the lives of your sons. And that's, I think, a nice way to conclude this nice conversation. I thank you very much, Dolores. We will hopefully see each other soon again. That would be great, because then we can travel again. Thank you. Voor de kijkers, ik dank u allen voor het bijwonen van deze tweede Gente Mágica. Volgende week om deze tijd ben ik er weer. En dan heb ik een interview met Willemijn van der Linden. Willemijn van der Linden heeft in 2015 in Nederland alles achter zich gelaten om zich volledig te wijden aan haar grote passie, de tango. Ging daarvoor naar Buenos Aires. Met haar ga ik praten over Buenos Aires en over de tango. Dus zeker reden om weer te kijken. Hier ben ik mee aan het einde gekomen van deze dag. Ik hoop dat jullie ervan genoten hebben. En tot een volgende keer. Tot ziens. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.